It says meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. We are live on YouTube. We are not as interesting as some of the other content, I'm sure. I cannot juggle. Backflips.
I can tell a joke.
Not a good one. You know who actually, Ray Allegrezza, my predecessor, was very good.
Yes.
He had very good delivery, very good patience.
Yes.
On jokes.
We know him well.
I do not have that skill set. But so, have you done much broadcast work, Jerry?
I have recently. Are we live actually on YouTube?
I believe we are.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So say hello.
Oh, hi. How you doing? It's good to be here.
Well, I guess we might as well jump in and get started. And my guest this week on the Home Furnishings Education Network is Jerry Cohen. Jerry, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Senior partner. Tell folks, what your background is and what it is that you survived this crazy time.
All right. The 10-second suppliers, designers, gift shops, home furnishings in general, matters and so forth. So we know the industry well, the culture and the people.
It's a really specialized industry, and so it's important. And just so people understand, because you're located in New York, you're not working strictly with New York. You are working with clients all over the country.
Thank you for that. It's domestically and internationally, actually, in Asia as well, and all over the United States. And obviously we're at High Point and other places where our clients congregate. So yes, we're everywhere.
Well, I think that's important, right? It is an international industry. So
it sure is.
We want to make sure that people realize that what they're about to hear today is not localized. It has value wherever your business is located and whatever challenge you're having. And speaking of challenges, right now, whether you're a retailer or a manufacturer, you're struggling with layoffs, with furloughs. How do you decide whether you should lay off or furlough? What are your legal obligations? Can you walk through for folks some of the differences and the different obligations and restrictions that come with those options?
Sure. So it's a little bit of semantics. Really, the employer is trying to communicate something to the employee. So what they're trying to say with a furlough is, we value you. This is hopefully temporary, no guarantees, but you're important to us. We don't want to permanently lay you off and terminate you. We're going through an issue here. We're going to furlough you, and hopefully when the time is right, bring you back. Now, the employee at that point still has unemployment insurance. Hopefully, not always, but often they continue benefits like medical and so forth. So it's really a communication from employer to employee. We want you back when the time is right. And for the employer, it's great also, because he doesn't have to go out and retrain in these difficult times. He wants his valued employees back.
So it seems to me, if I understand correctly, the key difference is the availability of benefits. If you furlough an employee, their benefits continue. If you lay them off, that's effectively a termination of their employment. And so they would only have whatever access they might have through COBRA or other kinds of.
That is true. Furlough is if the employer wants to provide benefits, they can. They don't have to. Often they do.
Okay, that's an important, I think, differentiation.
Absolutely.
Because I think people, get confused about what that is or what the strategy is. Now you mentioned that part of that is about the relationship, right? About communicating to the employee. And some of what you're going to talk about today is not just the legal obligation and not just the people's legal rights, but also retaining that relationship, whether it's with your suppliers, whether it's with your retailers, whoever that is. So there's not just legal implications, but there are business implications.
Absolutely. Employees are anxious, they're worried, they're concerned, they're looking for leadership, they're looking for reassurance. So all this is very important today. Other than legal, we'll be talking about relationships, branding, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So as we've seen, a lot of businesses have to close, right? With social distancing guidelines and shelter in place, a lot of non-essential businesses have had to close their doors, and particularly furniture stores have been faced with having to close their doors. What are some of the legal ramifications of those who chose to stay open when they were advised to close? And then what are the specific legal implications or ramifications when you actually do close, your obligations to your various constituents?
Okay, that's a
It's a long
question.
Well, take it in pieces if you want.
Let's break it down then. Okay, so sometimes you have no choice because of state, local, even town ordinances. You must close. You're not an essential business. You better close. In that case, sometimes and furniture stores aren't really considered essential in most jurisdictions that are having this essential business closure situation. Some furniture stores sell appliances. So I know a couple of operations that, because they have an appliance section, refrigeration and so forth, they might be essential and they're staying open. That is happening also. If they stay open, first of all, they have to be concerned about their employees, right? The employees are very anxious, they're worried. They don't necessarily want to come to work. You're asking them to come to work. I wouldn't force them to come to work, obviously, but you have an obligation to them. You want to make sure that that you're not transmitting any sort of contamination or the virus to your employees. So what are your obligations to them? Make sure they know that if they're not well, they must stay home. If they're in the back office, you should probably give them some equipment, gloves perhaps, or a mask. What you need to do is to show you're acting reasonably and prudently. That's from the legal point of view. God forbid if they should get sick, you have to show that you did everything in your power to make sure that you try to mitigate that. You might want to remind them to wash their hands often, not to congregate. If you have a cafeteria, maybe you want to close down the cafeteria for now. You want to take steps to show that you're being prudent and you're thinking ahead, doing everything you can to make sure you're not transmitting the coronavirus. So that's if your employees are working. Now, even if you're an essential furniture store, you have to start thinking about the public. I mean, I know the public, when they see a non-essential vendor open, they get concerned. Why is he doing that? What's going on here? So maybe think about branding and your relationship to your employees, to the public, and so forth. This will end one day. We have to think about what's going to happen when it's over. So there are a lot of things to worry about. The employees who are there, and if you do shut down, let's talk about you shut down, not if you had to or you chose to. Your employees who are now either furloughed or waiting to come back and so forth. Communication, very, very key, obviously. You want to keep the culture going. Maybe you want to have, I know many operations are having Zoom meetings, once a day, once a week, just like this. Seeing people's faces is so important. A lot of us are isolated in our little pigeonholes. We're worried, we're concerned. Any way you can bring your team together that you may have furloughed or who are now quarantined in place, that's a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. So there are legal implications and just regular operational day-to-day implications.
Now, a number of companies have parts of their operations that have closed and parts of their operations that have stayed open, right? Because they're continuing to fulfill orders. We know, for example, that ECommerce is continuing. And so you have this kind of hybrid situation. What kinds of rules apply there?
I mean, it's very similar. What you want to make sure that whatever steps you're taking for the people who are working versus not working, you want to document everything you're doing, once again, to safeguard the people that are working. And when I say documented, actually write down the steps that you're taking. Make sure that you have it in place. Because if anything happens, you want to show once again, you acted prudently and reasonably and so forth. So make sure that whatever you're doing, the warnings that you're giving and so forth is in writing, and you have it documented somewhere, so you can always show that you did everything you can do to safeguard your employees, which is your number one responsibility, your employees and your customers and clients. So always thinking about how you can show what you're doing and doing right is very, very key.
What kind of impact does furloughing employees and continuing their benefits have on things like family leave, maternity leave, these other kinds of unique or special situations that might arise Are there legal obligations, implications to those kinds of things?
You know, the landscape is changing so quickly, and there are some new regulations, you know, that were from the CARE Act and so forth. So there's one new law which was passed several weeks ago, and it applies to operations with employees between 50 and 500. And that new law is this. So if one of your employees, for example, has a child who's home from school, you have to give them a certain amount of time of partial pay for them to take care of their child. That's very important. That's if you're still open and not furloughed or laid off, obviously. And also if someone was tested positive for the coronavirus, or if they're taking care for a loved one or family member who is tested positive, you have to give them 2 weeks of sick pay for them to stay home and self-quarantine or take care of the loved one. So there are a lot of, and these regulations and laws seem to be passed and renewed every once in a while. So we are constantly monitoring what's going on in Washington. And I would tell the audience to, you know, constantly, well, look to Furniture Today, who's been a wonderful resource. Great job, Bill. Look to the CDC, look at WHO, and absolutely your state, local governments also. Just keep up to date. Things are changing very, very often.
Is there a specific relationship that is considered? So if you have to take care of a loved one, when you get, for example, bereavement leave, right? If the law defines who's impacted and how far out that, you know, that relative can be for you to apply for bereavement leave. Does the law specify anything as it relates to an immediate family member, an extended family member? What are the?
You know, I've read some places, in many places, that they talk about immediate, extended, and I think they're talking about grandparents and so forth. And then I saw the word loved one. I'm not exactly sure what a loved one means. We all love our family members. Maybe they're talking about significant others and so forth. I don't have an exact answer on that, but I can certainly find out.
Okay. A lot of furniture stores in particular have, those who don't have appliances have had to close. And that means they're having cash flow issues. It means they have to deal with leases. It means they have to deal, if they own their stores, they might have to deal with mortgage situations. Yes. What kind of options do they have legally? What kind of obligations do they have legally?
That's a good question, obviously. So let's break that down also. Let's talk about leases for a moment. So a lot of our retail clients and friends and colleagues, they have leases, and it's a contract. And it's an obligation, monetary obligation. You have to meet. You can't put your head in the sand, and it's not going to go away. Communication with your landlord is key. Do not be an ostrich. He's expecting to hear from you. You better speak to him. And what I'm finding out, most landlords are cooperating under a few scenarios. So I've heard and I've negotiated with landlords either an abatement. An abatement means you don't have to pay the rent. Sometimes that, depending on the landlord, that month is tagged on to the end of the lease, so nobody loses in a sense. Sometimes the landlord says, you know what, I'll take the month off the security deposit, but you can pay that over installments over a year, over 2 years, interest free. That's actually very nice also. Sometimes they're just allowing 30 days off and say, you know what, let's take April off. We'll worry about May when May comes around. So it's really many different ways that the landlord is trying to help, often the tenant. But most important thing is speak to your landlord. You must speak to your landlord because he has rights and you have obligations. Now, sometimes also look at the specific language of a lease because every lease is different. Sometimes when a landlord promises you access 24/7, we use those words 24/7, that might give you some rights. Sometimes there's something called force majeure clause, which means that both parties may not have obligations if an act of God happens. Sometimes that's not applicable depending on the language. Once again, you have to read the fine print. So it's all about talking, communicating, reading the contract, but just trying to get to some sort of a happy medium where everybody wins. Landlord doesn't want an empty box, that's for sure, but he's got obligations also.
Or for those who might have offices where a building is closed and the landlord's made a decision to close the building, are there like reasonable access provisions or things that allow people to get into a building if they need to, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, almost every building allows you to come in if you have to come in that I know of, that I've worked with, to pick up your mail, for example, to pick up checks, and so forth. They don't want you to operate your business. But once again, even if you don't have access to your space, and you might say to the landlord, "Hey, I can't get into my building. I don't have to pay your rent." Not good enough. It's really not good enough. You have to come to some sort of an understanding. And usually, the landlords, or 90% of them, will ask you to enter into a stipulation, into a written abatement agreement. It could be short, but it's going to be in writing.
Does that agreement have to be reviewed by an attorney, or does it have to be notarized? Is there some kind of provision, or can that be just between the two parties?
It's, hey, I'm a lawyer. So my answer is going to be, you better have someone who knows, read it. It could be a lawyer if you want to trust your broker, but it's a legal document and it's going to bind you. So you have to be careful. Read the fine print. And once again, it depends on your relationship. Some landlords are more accommodating than others. Some landlords actually require, a 3 or 4 page amendment to the agreement. So it really depends.
I just want to circle back to the force majeure discussion. If I understood you correctly, what you're saying is there may be provisions for that in a contract, but there may also not be. So it's not something that automatically applies.
Correct. And even if it is in the contract, and a force majeure clause really that says that the parties don't have certain obligations because of an act of God or something that's unforeseen. Even if that clause is there, it may not be operable in this situation. I just entered into a contract during this whole crazy crisis with a Chinese company. When I got back a markup of the contract, this is very true. In the force majeure provision, they added the words "or pandemic," because that wasn't there. They had storms and hurricanes and this and that. They didn't have pandemic. It's there now.
Interesting. So that's likely to be something that we'll see in contracts going forward.
It's going to be my contract. It's going to be my contract going forward.
Yeah, I don't think you'll be alone there. For retailers who have had to close stores in some cases very suddenly, because this whole thing, we feel like, I know when you're trapped, you feel like this has been going on forever and ever. A month ago, we were pretty much out and about, and the airlines were flying and stores were open. And so all of this has occurred within a month. And in some cases, companies had very little time to react. So retailers who found themselves very quickly confronted with having to close their stores while they had delivery scheduled, while they had orders coming in, while they had these, your business goes on in the normal course of business, and there's a lot of things that get suddenly disrupted.
Absolutely.
What are the legal implications and obligations, and are there any ways that you can help kind of guide people on how to deal with those things?
Well, it's I always say, and anticipate the issue, mitigate the issue that you can mitigate. If you can't mitigate the issue, prepare, then implement, and then monitor. These are the steps you have to take in a crisis situation. I've used the word communication a lot today. I'm going to use it again. You have to communicate with all your vendors. You have to communicate with all your customers. And that's what people should be doing if they're not doing it at the moment. Just because of this crazy pandemic, the world has not come to an end. All of our contractual obligations are still alive and can come back to haunt us. We have to communicate and work with each other to make sure that the supply chains stay open between vendor, manufacturer, retailer, customer. And it's all about, through these crazy times, working together. Is there legal issues? Absolutely. A contract's a contract. Your contract with your customer, the retailer, the customer, is a contract. It's not going away just because there happens to be a virus. It's not. It's really there. Now, you don't want to lose, obviously you have reputation, you're thinking about your brand, so you don't want to force a customer to do something a customer can't do, especially if the customer doesn't want you to deliver furniture to his house right now. I'm not having a stranger in my house. You out of your mind? I'm not taking it. So you can't force it, even though you need the cash flow because you need to get the COD. So you're gonna have to work. You have to work with each other, and that's what I'm finding out is happening. I see people cooperating, it's a domino effect. From the customer, the cash, just, hey, follow the money. That's what it's all about. And it's a domino effect from beginning to end. Everybody's being affected, and we have to work together. For the most part, I'm finding that's happening.
I presume when you talk about communication, you're talking about written communication so that there is a record of that communication so that it's something where...
Oh, it could be an email, or it could be a fax, or it could be a conversation that's followed up with an email, just to confirm our conversation. We understand that. Yeah, very important. Documentation during this crisis for purposes of insurance, if you'll need insurance in the future, or for purposes of liability, you need things in writing to make sure that there's a record of exactly what you did and what everyone has decided to how to work together.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, as we follow, you say follow the money, right? So you follow it from the consumer to the retailer, now to the supplier. What are the obligations between the retailer and the supplier? So if an order has been placed, at what point does that become, or is that considered are you contractually bound to accept that order, or to pay for it in full, or, as it relates to terms and all of that kind of stuff?
It actually all depends on the terms and conditions between manufacturer and retailer, or supplier retailer. And I've drafted terms and conditions on for both parties. I can see in the terms and conditions that I've seen between manufacturer and retailer, a force majeure provision there might be very helpful for the manufacturer, saying that oftentimes force majeure will say disruption in supply chain, or it'll say labor issues. These words are important. These words are in my provisions anyway. It'll be very important to protect the manufacturer. So if a retailer says, "Hey, where's my merchandise?" The supplier may have an out there. But once again, it's all about the fine print in whatever relationship you have. These are all contractual obligations that, once again, don't disappear because we think the world's coming to an end. The legal system is not coming to an end. It's, fortunately, unfortunately, churning away. So as far as the retailer goes, who's can a supplier force merchandise on a retailer? Well, he can ship it, but if it's coming from Asia, is it going to stay, is it going to be on the docks? First of all, is it coming across the water? Because China was closed for 2 months. So there's a gigantic disruption across the whole supply chain. And it's working itself out, little by little. Right now, China's open for business more than it was. So we're going to see now the big push. I'll be interested to see how that works out now. But once again, it's going to be people working together to make it work. You can't force someone to do something they don't want to do, and you don't want to take them to court. First of all, courts aren't going to be very receptive to it. And by the way, they're closed. Courts aren't open for business at the moment.
Well, that would certainly take care of any lawsuit issues for the short term. The other thing that we had talked about as we were preparing for this is a situation where payment terms might be changed unilaterally by one party or the other. And you were saying that even if there might be a legal remedy at some point, there are other issues at play.
Yeah, always. And I'm telling this I'm speaking to my clients about this. This will end one day, soon perhaps. And we really have to think about ramping up again and business back as usual. Whatever we do today, people have long-term memories. We're all elephants when it comes to this. We want to work with the people who are good to us. So if you're a manufacturer and you're being really bad to your retailer, does he really need you? Maybe not. We go to markets, a whole bunch of vendors out there looking for business. We're all hungry for business. So it's so important today, I think, to cooperate and find some sort of a middle ground where it's a win-win. Sometimes you can't, in which case, make a decision. If your retailer does say, I'm not paying at this point, and see what happens, if you must. But by the way, talking about payment terms and so forth, there are SBA loans out there. Gene on your Furniture Today webinar did a wonderful job going through all the steps that the government's trying to help retailers and operations and every business Draw down on your on your revolver if you have to. Find ways to stay afloat and keep your obligations going, but save cash. It's all about staying liquid. You must save cash. Work down the chain. Everybody work together if they can. I'm finding out people are cooperating. Save cash, make it a win-win situation. Think about the future. This will end, and you're going to continue. Relationships are everything in our industry. Everything. Everyone knows everyone, and they don't forget.
Long memories.
Oh, yeah. We have reputations.
Yeah. Now, Jerry, you also do a lot of work on the licensing side. So
Yes.
There are people who have royalty fees, other kinds of things due to them. Excuse me, I thought I would not get phone calls during this, but turned it off.
Yes.
See, a new thing to learn in the Zoom world, right? Life sometimes intrudes. As it relates to, royalty fees, licensing payments, those kinds of things, do the same caveats apply? Are there any differences there?
Well, it's a contract. No sale, no royalty. No money, no commission. So same exact story. Same exact story between licensor and licensee. The licensor, the designer, or whoever's giving their name, wants to make sure that there are sales. The manufacturer wants to sell. That's the only way they make money. So if they don't sell, there's no royalty. There's nothing for the licensor. So licensor licensor, the designer, or the name brand, or whoever may want to try to help push sales somehow. Maybe give a webinar to their customers, or some other way to promote. But yes, once again, that's a partnership. Licensor licensee is a partnership, and it's a symbiotic relationship. One must help the other. And this is a great time to get together and find out how they can work together in this period to increase sales. Online sales now are key in our industry. Is there a way to increase online sales somehow by working together? Something to think about.
I think sometimes when people are isolated, they feel like their problems are unique to them, and they feel somewhat like, oh, this is a stupid question, it's just me. Can you give folks an idea of some of the most common questions that you're hearing and that you're getting from clients, just so that they kind of can say, oh, okay, that sounds familiar, I'm dealing with that too? What are you hearing from your clients?
When will this be over?
You have an answer?
Soon. It's usually cash flow issues. What do I do about my obligations? Whether it be a mortgage obligation, a lease obligation, an obligation to a supplier to their component, people giving components and so forth. It's always about a money issue. And my answer always is anticipate the problem. Go through who are all your stakeholders. If you're a retailer, what does that mean? Your landlord, your customers, your employees. Who are your stakeholders? And then anticipate. Put yourself in their shoes. What are their questions? What are they worried about? What are they concerned about? Now, logic is not going to win over emotion. So put the logic a little bit to the side and think about their emotion. Where are they coming from? And then find a solution. So it's all about with employees, and they're anxious, they're worried about their job, they're worried about their family. What can you tell them to set them at ease? Your customers, either, where's my merchandise, or I don't want my merchandise. Put yourself in their shoes, communicate with them. With your bank, the bank, will the bank temporarily not collect their interest and so forth? Speak to them. With your suppliers, what are they looking for? They're looking for cash. They're looking to push their merchandise out because their warehouse is full. Where are they coming from? What can you do, to discuss with them? So anticipate, mitigate, prepare, implement, monitor. That's the crisis recovery flow chart right there.
And I'll add one more. I think you brought up a couple times: communicate.
Always communicate. Day and night, always communicate. That's the key. That's everything. The rest is commentary.
There we go. You know what? I think that's a great place to wrap up, a great point to end on. Jerry, thank you for taking the time with us today. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Website or email. Website is ctswlaw.com. And email is jcohen, Cohen, at ctswlaw.com. Or they can contact you and you'll tell me.
I will absolutely tell them. In the story that we wrote about this, we actually have a link to you, so they can also come through us to get a link to you. So hopefully, if people have more questions, they'll be able to reach out.
Thank you. Stay safe, stay well.
And wash your hands.
Wash your hands. 6 feet.
Be well, Jerry. Thank you.
Yeah.